neither side has the offensive advantage. Russia has failed in its multiple attempts in recent months to break through, but so has Ukraine. And both sides have very considerable defences, which mean it's hard for the other to have a sustained breakthrough. So that puts the onus on attrition, on being able to resupply your forces with people as well as with weapons. And both sides are struggling in that regard, but neither side has exhausted their potential.
You ask any one of Ukraine's allies, chances are they will say, we are backing Ukraine for as long as it takes. But how sincere is that now, do you believe?
I mean, I'm rather sceptical about that report over the weekend. Clearly, people are talking about how this war might end, but I think both the United States and Germany accept, as indeed does our government, that the lead in that has to be taken by the Ukrainians themselves, not by outside powers. After all, the Ukrainians are the ones who are fighting and whose people, whose soldiers are dying in such significant numbers. So it's very much a lead there. What I would say is that over the last year, this war on the ground at least has been largely stalemated. Those who thought that the counteroffensive would be successful this summer have been very disappointed.
Yeah, and it is also true, though, isn't it, that among Ukraine's friends, stocks of weapons have depleted. The costs of supporting Ukraine have mounted. You imagine that could easily lead to some sort of subtle shift in thinking.
Well, I think the United States in particular is increasing its arms production capability, but for the US, which is by far the largest supplier of arms to Ukraine, they are faced with competing priorities, a competing priority in relation to China in Asia, but also now I think a diversion of diplomatic attention and potentially also arms supplies as a result of the very unexpected conflict between Israel and Hamas. So I think there is some worry that the United States, focusing on three fronts, will not necessarily prioritize the European front, particularly, and that's particularly, I think, a concern in the Republican Party.
Yes, I mean, there is an argument, and I've heard this from a Republican senator more than once, that the war in Ukraine has meant that Russian military power has been degraded, and in the course of that conflict, not a single American life has been lost. And this senator called that a good deal. And there is an argument to that effect, isn't there?
There's a very strong argument to that effect, which many Americans believe. I think certainly the Biden administration believes that, and some Republicans in the Senate in particular believe that. But it's also the case that the House of Representatives has blocked Biden administration proposals for increased aid to Ukraine. Not that everybody in the House on the Republican side does that, but the nature of the American political gridlock is that the Republican leadership in the House needs to back those budget requests, and they've not so far done so. And just to give you an idea, that the current Biden administration request for increase for extra military aid to Ukraine is $60 billion. In contrast, Germany this year is planning to spend around 5 billion Deutschmarks, and the UK about £2.5 billion. So the United States, in comparison with the big European countries, supplying much more than we are doing, and therefore absolutely essential to the effort.
I mean, you mentioned the Republican Party. There's more, not total, but there's more skepticism among Republicans about supporting the war in Ukraine, and consequent to that, it is argued that Vladimir Putin will keep the offensive going until there's a change of leadership in Washington. Do you buy that?
I do. I think that's one of the factors which will figure in the Russian calculation. But it's also the case that the current stalemate is one which suggests that we're going to have a long war in any case. So even if there wasn't that issue about a potential Trump administration, what they might do, I think we would be faced with a war that could go on for a long time. And people draw comparisons with World War I, which of course went on for more than 4 years. I think that's an entirely plausible, it's pretty horrible scenario to talk about. Neither side has the offensive advantage. Russia has failed in its multiple attempts in recent months to break through, but so has Ukraine, and both sides have very considerable defences, which mean it's hard for the other to have a sustained breakthrough. So that puts the onus on attrition, on being able to resupply your forces with people as well as with weapons. And both sides are struggling in that regard, but neither side has exhausted their potential. Ukraine, however, relies much more on outside support on the weapons side than does Russia.
So looking at it then from Ukraine's perspective, do you consider it realistic, at all realistic, that Ukraine's stated aim of liberating Crimea and the occupied Donbass is achievable?
I don't think it's achievable in the next year or the next period. Anything's possible, of course, but it seems pretty unlikely in that time period. The scenario in which that might become possible is one in which there's a long war. Ukraine has a sustained and high level of support from the United States and European allies. And over time, that erodes the Russian capability to keep in the fight. But it's likely to take more time than some optimists thought likely. And I think it's also possible that this will not lead to a political settlement. I don't think a political settlement is at all likely as an outcome of this conflict, but some sort of armistice, some sort of freezing of the position on the ground, formalizing where we actually are and have been for the last year, might be a possibility in a year's time or more. But that will be something for the Ukrainians to decide. That massive, one of the things we have to remember in terms of Ukraine's military potential, it's not mainly about the weapons they have, critical though they are. It's about their capacity to provide the people, the skilled people, the organized people to sustain that war effort, which is a tremendous drain on their society and their economy. And the Ukrainian people are united around those war aims for now, but whether that lasts forever, we'll just have to wait and see.